Welcome to the 1-0 podcast, hosted by Joe Cook and Brad Kellner. The 1-0 podcast is part of the Everyone Gets a Trophy podcast channel. And today we will talk about a recent report from On3 Sports about who Texas' next wide receiver coach may be and some hardware he helped a player get during this past season. We'll also look back at the year that was in Texas sports, going all the way back to January 2nd, which was a pretty important day in Texas sports history in multiple ways, before talking about Texas basketball and their upcoming Big 12 slate. Be sure to listen to our show and Everyone Gets a Trophy by Kevin Dunn and Paul Wadlington. Subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, please take a look at our sponsors.
Audio visual consultations. All right, maybe you missed Christmas, maybe you missed the holiday season, but make it a New Year's resolution to get the home TV setup of your dreams with AV Consultations. They're the best in the business, and they've been the best in the business in Central Texas for more than 3 decades. 512-255-8678. And we're also brought to you by Altstadt Brewery, Altstadt Beer. It is German beer made here and the best beer that you can find all throughout the state of Texas. Fantastic beer for the holidays, fantastic beer for New Year's festivities, whatever you have going on. Never a bad time for some Altstadt beer. No impurities, no regrets.
So, yeah, this had kind of been a rumored addition for a little bit in recent weeks since Andre Coleman was let go, seemed to be the lead guy and a candidate that Matt Zenitz over at On3 and plenty of other outlets have, including Inside Texas and plenty of others, have indicated would probably be the guy. As we're recording this on December 30th, Pitt, the ACC champion, plays in the Peach Bowl. So kind of we're expecting it to happen, maybe right after kickoff, maybe here earlier today, kind of how these things go. But looks like a guy with not just recruiting chops, which is going to be important for this hire, because Texas has struggled with recruiting the wide receiver position a lot in recent years. But this guy also has a very unique offensive background, his own, and also developmental chops with Jordan Addison,
Yep.
Pitt wide receiver who won the Biletnikoff this year and also was a big part of why Kenny Pickett made it all the way to New York.
Can we get Jordan Addison here too? Is there a way to make that happen? He's only a true sophomore.
Got to hit the portal first.
I know. Oh, my God. If that news dropped after this news drops, then, I'd be really, really excited. But, yeah, Pitt's offense as a whole was spectacular this year. I think they had the 79th ranked total offense in college football last season. And this year, in Brennan Marion's first year and only year at Pitt, they had the number 5 total offense in all of college football. Now, he wasn't calling plays. He was only a wide receivers coach. But still, he coached the Biletnikoff Award winner as a true sophomore. And I saw this stat just now before recording this podcast, Joe. In the college football playoff era, there have only been 3 wide receivers to have 90 catches, 1,500 total yards, and 18 or more touchdowns. Justin Jefferson, Devontae Smith, and Jordan Addison. Jefferson and Smith, fantastic college careers. Both of those guys off to great starts to their pro careers as well. And Jordan Addison, a guy coached by Brennan Marion. So, yeah, this dude has taken a meteoric rise up the coaching ranks. And I'll tell you what, my old co-host in Austin, Rod Babers, the lifetime Longhorn, I feel like everybody listening knows who Rod B is, probably doesn't need an introduction. But he's been raving about this guy for a couple of years now. And this dude is an innovative mind. He clearly knows how to work with talent. He's been lauded as a pretty good recruiter as well. It feels like there is a lot to like with Brennan Marion to Texas if these reports actually come to fruition, Joe.
Yeah, I'm most excited about obviously recruiting has to get upgraded, but I'm really excited about that offensive background that he has. It was responsible for something the Cousins will love. When I believe he was the offensive coordinator of the Howard Bison, they went to Las Vegas to play the Runnin' Rebels and recorded the largest upset, I think, in point spread history. They were like a 43-point dog and beat the Rebels in Vegas. So, and a lot of it has to do with it's called the go-go offense. And he wasn't calling plays at Pitt. I don't know if he even is in this Peach Bowl. I think he may have stayed up in Pittsburgh had they given him a coordinator position, but that never seemed to come to fruition before all these reports started to come out. It's predicated a lot on two-back offense, and not like the Tom Herman two-back where Cade Brewer would be basically playing fullback, and then you'd have Roschon in the backfield. This is an offense that'll allow for some innovation to be used with guys like Bijan Robinson and Rashawn Johnson on the field at the same time. And then you could even throw, Jonathan Brooks in there, and who knows, maybe even you get some Jaden Blue action as well. Or I think another option is you can maybe even throw Jordan Whittington in there and, kind of rotate, maybe have him do some of the receivery type things. But I do like this idea that you can combine or at least get some influences from what he has done as an offensive play caller in his FCS stops, using that pretty unique offense. It's not something you see across college football too much. Use that and incorporate some of that into Steve Sarkisian's offense. And I'm looking pretty forward to something like that.
Yeah, I was doing some research on the go-go offense earlier today, and you mentioned it, right? Two-back principles. You see a lot of that, and that bodes well with the personnel that Texas has. I don't even know if you mentioned Keelan Robinson, but obviously throw him into the mix too. I mean, this backfield is loaded with talent, and you want those guys on the field. I mean, hell, you and I, Joe, were talking about this before the season, right? Like, hey, Texas's deepest position on its roster is running back. Get more than one of those guys on the field as often as you can. And we saw it sometimes this year. It's not like Sark didn't do it at all, but there always felt like there could have been more usage of the running backs, and there could have been more ways to weaponize some of your best and most talented skill position players on offense. So hopefully Brennan Marion is able to impact Steve Sarkisian a little bit. I mean, obviously this is still Sark's offense. He's still going to be calling the plays. And that's my question, right? How much of an impact will Brennan Marion have? Hopefully he has some, because this offense has been pretty successful everywhere that he's been. And yeah, he wasn't calling the plays at Pitt, but he obviously made some changes to that Pitt offense. You could see it watching them play ball this year that helped them become one of the most prolific offenses in college football. Biletnikoff Award winner, maybe the first quarterback off the board in the 2022 NFL draft. Just a lot to like with what we saw from Pitt's offense this year. And I think Brennan Marion deserves some credit. I will say this, Joe, I'm a little surprised Texas was able to pull this off. And it's not official yet, but I trust On Three. I trust the work that you guys do. So I've got no reason to assume that it's not happening. And I'm a little surprised that it is happening. Look, Texas is a better job than Pitt. Texas has more money, more resources than Pitt. There's no doubt about that. Brennan Marion, it feels like a lot of people know this guy's name now. And I've looked on Twitter over the last couple of days and weeks, like a lot of people have been clamoring for their schools to hire this guy as an offensive coordinator. And look, Twitter doesn't determine who gets hired and fired and whatever. But I almost thought this dude could get a pretty good offensive coordinator gig if he really wanted to. So I'm a little bit surprised, pleasantly surprised, Joe, that he's taking a wide receivers coach job at Texas. And look, I don't know how long we're going to have him, but I do think he's got the ability and the chance to make a pretty big impact in Austin.
Yeah, I don't want to call this a hesitancy about bringing in Marion, but I think you can't leave it unsaid. This may not be a lengthy stop. This is someone who's a rising star, it seems, in this industry, and somebody will probably want to make him their offensive coordinator in whenever that time comes. But
I hope it is a short stay. I really do.
Yeah.
Like, that's a sign of a good, healthy program, right? Like, look at Nick Saban and his assistants every year. They get poached. Well, if Brennan Marion gets poached after 1 year to be a coordinator or even a head coach somewhere, then that means Texas's wide receivers did pretty damn well in 2022.
Exactly. And you can't worry about that. But what you look at his developmental aspect. He's got the Biletnikoff a winner this year. So whatever living room, whatever high school, whatever FaceTime he jumps on, he's not going to have that trophy, but he can say, I coach the best wide receiver in college football. And I know that there are other coaches that Texas is going to recruit against who have pretty similar selves, whether they're first team All-American, stuff like that, any sort of accolade that they'd like to offer. But you combine Steve Sarkisian, who, helped Devontae Smith win the Heisman. You combine Brennan Marion, who helped Jordan Addison win the Biletnikoff. That's a good sell. And Texas has always – actually, it's a great sell. And Texas has always had pretty good sells for wide receiver, but they haven't landed. So at this point, you kind of look at it. If I don't know if you can put together a better recruiting sell on the trail, and if it doesn't come to fruition here, then I don't know if it ever will.
Agreed. And you look at the last two wide receivers coaches at Texas. I mean, how underwhelming were both of them, right? Drew Maringer, some of the stories we heard about him towards the end of his tenure, and of course after he was fired by Tom Herman, and also Andre Coleman. Like, I wasn't thrilled with Andre Coleman getting elevated to wide receiver coach in the first place. And then I was less thrilled that Sark kept him around after Herman lost his job. And yeah, wide receiver play and recruiting has been suboptimal, to say the least, at Texas over the last few years. So it feels like it should work now, Joe. And I'm with you. If it can't work now, I don't know if it's ever going to work, because Texas has a lot to sell right now. Plus Xavier Worthy, too. It's not just the coaches, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I forgot to mention him.
Yeah, as a true freshman, putting up ridiculous numbers, setting all sorts of school records. Like, okay, guys want to play when they're true freshmen. The guys look at a guy who was a true freshman, putting up the numbers that he put up and getting all the playing time that he got. They're going to like that. So, yeah, seemingly a lot to sell. Unfortunately, Texas missed out on what was a really good wide receiver class in the state of Texas. They got one, but there were, 4 or 5 other really, really talented wide receivers that signed elsewhere. But obviously, hopefully, maybe in the portal, and then for the class of 2023, Texas can strike gold at wide receiver.
Yeah, 2023 has definitely one of the best in the country in DeSoto's Jonte Cook. So,
yeah,
and that's a guy who already likes Texas. So maybe this combination helps with that. Yeah, this has been the biggest dual development recruiting hole, I think, of any position at Texas in recent years. I mean, I guess you could argue offensive line coach, but even then, you've had good years and you've had some guys get picked pretty highly, and even so is wide receiver. But there's been just hasn't been enough living up to what those rankings are. So maybe this is the right combination of everything to really get that position going at Texas and make it easier for some of those kids to decide to, stay in state. They so chose. Anything else on Marion? Are you going to be watching the I think Pickett is sitting out. I guess what are some things that you would want to see from Addison tonight in that Peach Bowl?
Yeah, look, I'm curious if Marion's going to be calling the plays in this game, right? I'm sure they'll show him on the sidelines, especially now that these Texas rumors are out there. So I wonder what type of role he has in this game tonight, if his role is increased at all. But, yeah, it's not the same. I mean, the best player arguably for each of these teams is not playing, with Kenny Pickett at Pitt and then Kenneth Walker, the stud running back at Michigan State. Both of those guys are off to the league. So the game's lost a little bit of luster, but, man, Jordan Addison, if you haven't seen him play, I don't know how many people are watching Pitt football. And, hell, I feel like a lot of people are going to be listening to this podcast after the game already happens. But hopefully you did watch. Hopefully you are watching. Hopefully you will watch. Hopefully you did watch whenever you're listening, of course. Addison's a stud player. And if Texas is, in fact, getting Marion, I think there are a lot of reasons to be excited, because he checks seemingly every box. He's got a great story, too. This is a guy who was homeless at the start of his JUCO career. And I was watching a video earlier today. I mean, he was sleeping in his JUCO stadium press box and in building hallways on campus. Like, this guy had nothing. And he worked his way up to a really good college player who ended his career at Tulsa, transferred from JUCO, played at Tulsa, and obviously has worked his way up the coaching ranks too. So seemingly an easy guy to root for, and I'm glad he's going to be donning burnt orange next year, Joe. Oh, by the way, last thing, can you tell your cousin Jonte to commit to Texas? What's the deal? Do you have an update on him?
I haven't talked to him in a while. The last family reunion wasn't held this year. So
well, it's on you, man. If he goes somewhere else, I'm blaming you.
Anthony and I guess we'll have to get on his case.
Dalvin,
you want to look back, Dalvin? Yeah, well, the more famous. Want to look at the year that was in Texas sports?
Yeah, man, let's do it.
So I guess what I've been doing is approaching this from a calendar year perspective. 2021, but a lot of the things that contributed towards Texas being the Directors Cup champion, which covers 2020 and 2021, I think happened in this calendar year. 3 national championships, of course, women's tennis, men's swimming and diving, and rowing. Awesome finishes there. Conference championships in 13 sports, top 10 finishes in 13 sports. But I think for the purposes of this podcast, at least in 2021, we'll look towards, I think, what everybody would consider probably the 4 to 5 most popular, and that is obviously football, men's basketball, baseball, and women's basketball. And I guess we could throw softball in there as well. And I think we have to start back in January. You go ahead and you look at January 1st, celebrate the new year, probably at home. And then on January 2nd, like me, I was playing golf that day. January 2nd, not only are you watching Texas play Kansas in Fog Allen, you're watching Texas pummel Kansas in Fog Allen. So you're already feeling pretty good about that. Then all of a sudden, the news starts to break that Tom Herman is out, and that is probably going to be Steve Sarkisian. So Texas started off this year with a bang. It was a whirlwind day, sprinting off the 12th tee at Lions to my car in order to get home and be able to work. But you have Greg Brown dunking all over Fog Allen, and then Texas making a big hire in the days after the Alamo Bowl.
Wow, Greg Brown posterizing Fog Allen. If someone could actually turn that into a poster, that'd be pretty incredible. What a day, dude. I mean, like you, I remember exactly where I was on January 2nd. I was actually in Houston. Now, I live in Houston now. At the time, I was obviously living in Austin, but I was at a buddy's place, and he was gone. I just had the apartment to myself, and I was watching the basketball game, and then boom, the Tom Herman / Steve Sarkisian news drops, and it was a crazy day for Texas Longhorn fans everywhere. So, I mean, look, obviously Tom Herman, a rough 4-year stretch, a really bumpy 4th year. And even though I know we talked about it, Joe, and I know on the radio in Austin when I was up there, we talked about it too, even though CDC gave that, I guess you can call it, vote of confidence in December of 2020.
Vote of existence.
Yeah, it sort of felt like the writing was on the wall that Tom Herman was not going to be brought back for a 5th year, but the Sark thing seemingly came out of nowhere. I mean, CDC did a great job kind of keeping that thing under wraps. All of a sudden, Sark is brought in. So, yeah, that was an eventful day. It was the most expensive coaching change decision in Texas football history when you take into consideration the buyout for Herman and the buyout for his assistants, and obviously what you had to pay to go get Sark and his coaching staff too. So, a lot of money changed hands on Jan 2, 2021. And you're right. I mean, a bonkers, absolutely wild start to what turned out to be a pretty wild year in general for Texas Longhorn Athletics.
Yeah, so after that, you started adding the staff, and Texas goes into the portal, I believe, and added, I think that was when Ray Thornton and Ovia Gofu made the decisions. I know that was obviously after the new year, but, you're adding the staff, and at that time, you have Texas basketball starting to gear things up. And, this was – everybody looked at this Shaka Smart team like it was going to be his best chance at making noise in the tournament. And Texas, I guess through a basketball perspective, gets through February, does well, gets a little help from COVID in the Big 12 tournament, and wins the Big 12 tournament over what's his name?
Cade?
Number 1 pick in the draft, Cade Cunningham. There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Wins the Big 12 tournament. We see Jericho Sims smile. And we see like a little bit of evidence, at least at that time. We all know what happened after that, but at least at that time, we saw something that may have indicated, you know what? He's probably stuck around for way too long. He probably, most people didn't even want for him to continue to still have that Texas head basketball coaching job. But at that point, he had done something. He had rewarded whoever decided to have faith in him. He had rewarded those people and showed that, maybe it wasn't progress. Maybe it wasn't I'm here to stay, because we all know it wasn't. But it was something finally for Shaka to show the fan base, look, here's what I've worked for. Here's something for y'all in this year. And that was a fun ride to cover, even though I was covering it from home. That was a very, very entertaining weekend watching the Horns take home the Big 12 tournament.
It was fun and shocking at the same time. And yeah, once again, a very eventful 2021. A lot of surprises for Texas Longhorn sports this year. But maybe the biggest surprise was Jericho Sims smiling. I mean, he was in Austin for 4 years. I don't think we saw that one time until the Big 12 championship. That was a fun weekend and pretty unexpected. Look, I mean, we knew Texas was talented last year. We knew they had a chance to be really, really good. They were a top 10, top 15 team for large stretches of the season. So you felt like there was some potential there. But, I mean, Shaka Smart had never really won anything in March. Yes, I know the NIT is played in March. Shaka Smart had never really won anything in March in his first 5 years in Austin. So it surprised me. Texas was able to get it done. And, well, unfortunately, Joe, 7 days after that, you go from the highest of highs in the Shaka Smart era to maybe the lowest of lows, and one of the lowest lows in Texas basketball history.
Yeah, 3 seed. I put Texas in my Final Four. I did. I was riding the high.
Yeah,
I thought that they were, and I thought that they had a clear path towards making it to that Final Four. And then they go ahead and play Abilene Christian, and I can't even remember. I want to block that game out of my memory, but they didn't even score 50 points, did they?
It was a game in the low 50s, I think. It might have been like 53-49 or something like that.
And you get no shows from some of the top players on that team that had helped that team throughout the entire season. It was just a brutal end, and that's a big indication as to why Shaka Smart is now in Milwaukee coaching Marquette and not in Austin with another team.
Yeah, but 53-52, the final of that one, Joe. Like, I don't know if I'm mad at myself for not knowing that or happy.
Oh, it's fine.
Erase that from my memory.
And it helped a lot of different people. We'll get to Chris Beard getting hired in a second, but Chris Beard takes the Texas job, and of course, Rodney Terry leaves UTEP to go to be an assistant at Texas, and Golding, who was the head coach at Abilene Christian, then goes to UTEP. So a lot of people benefited from that. I guess only Rodney Terry technically stepped down, but I don't know how the minors were doing. But during that time, before Chris Beard got hired, as the calendar turned from March to April, we saw a lot of positive results from Vic Schaefer's team.
Yeah,
it was a good team. It was his first year, so inheriting a lot from what Karen Aston did, and bringing a lot of what had helped him get to a couple of national finals at Mississippi State. They beat Bradley in the first round, and then the moment that everybody kind of realized that, this is the two moments, I guess you could say, that everybody kind of realized, okay, Vic Schaefer may have something good here, may be able to build something good here. They beat UCLA 71-62 to get to the Sweet 16, and then they beat Maryland 64-61 to get to the Elite Eight in his first year. And we're guys who we went to Texas, and it's we have to focus our attention on the big three sports whenever that's what most people want to cover. But whenever the women's sports get into the postseason, it is one of the funnest rides to cover, because you're hopping on something that is already going very well, and you'd like to see it continue to go well. And that's exactly what this experience was in year one of Vic Schaefer. And it rewarded everybody who made the choice, who thought that it was time for Karen Aston to go, and B, who joined that ride as it was going to, got stopped by Dawn Staley, but it rewarded everybody who, had jumped in at the time.
Yeah, Dawn Staley in South Carolina have stopped a lot of magical tournament rides over the last few years, but it was a fun ride for Texas women's basketball in the tournament. Look, I'm not going to front. I don't watch every Texas women's game during the regular season. I usually watch the Baylor games, and then once the postseason hits, that's when I really start to pay attention. But I was locked in. I was like yelling at my TV at times during that Elite Eight run for Texas. Fun to watch, man. And Yeah, Vic Schaefer in year one as advertised. You figured it would happen, right? The dude's a phenomenal coach, led Mississippi State to a national title game appearance and a crazy upset win over UConn during his tenure in Stark Vegas. But it's like, all right, you just assume with any coach in any sport, it's going to take time to really see success. Well, it didn't take long for Vic Schaefer at all. Players bought into his system, defensive oriented, very gritty, and it worked. And Texas pulled off a couple of really, really big upsets. They were double-digit dogs, I remember, against Maryland. And Maryland was the highest scoring team in women's college hoops, and Texas held them to like 61 points in that game, as you mentioned. So, yeah, fun ride. And early returns on Vic Schaefer, great hire. So if you're a Texas women's basketball fan, or hell, if you're just a Texas fan and you want to see the teams do successful, then you've got to be excited about Vic Schaefer in the direction of Texas women's hoops.
So during that time, we kind of skipped over a little bit as far as David Pierce's baseball team goes. We kind of went from March to we'll close out basketball real quick. So yeah, like you mentioned, a week later, after as this is all going on, it becomes clear that Shaka Smart needs to, he's not going to be Texas head coach next year.
Yeah.
And it's kind of up to him.
That had been clear for years, if you ask me, Joe. Right.
But it kind of becomes up to him how that happens. And I think Chris Del Conte is extremely averse to having to fire people. Sometimes, you have to, but I think if he had his preference, everybody would be soft landing somewhere. It's hard to think that's not, that's what it's hard for me to see that this wasn't a soft landing. And so Texas was without a basketball head coach for about a week or so, something like that. Mm-hmm. And we saw, what was it? The main candidate sounded like it was Dana Alton, who's the Ohio State coach. Was he
Holtman?
I think he was a consideration, but kind of, sort of, not really. It was basically Dana Altman, Royal Ivy, and Chris Beard. And by the time that, April 1st rolled around when his buyout dropped out, and of course, Chris Del Conte met him at that McDonald's in Plainview, it kind of should have – the immediacy of the hire should have indicated that it was always going to be Chris Beard. Royal Ivy, of course, did interview. And I think Royal Ivy – is on his way towards being a head coach, probably at the NBA in the next few years.
Yeah.
It just didn't work out with him at this juncture in his career, and with a guy like Chris Beard there, and much to Texas Tech fans' chagrins all over it, Chris Beard was hired at Texas.
Oh, dude, that was my favorite non-championship winning moment of the year for Texas. And honestly, it might have been just my favorite moment of the year for Texas. Look, I talked about the loss to Abilene Christian being one of the lowest, if not the lowest, points for Texas basketball. I think I coined it as the lowest moment in Texas basketball history. But to me, it was a good loss because it got you Chris Beard. Now, look, I'll eat my words if I'm wrong. I'll eat my words if Chris Beard doesn't work out in Austin. Obviously, we're not even midway through year one yet, so it's way too early to tell what things are going to look like. But, dude, I loved the hire at the time. Then he went and crushed the transfer portal. Texas is a ranked team right now going into conference play. It feels like there's a lot of reason for optimism, not only for this year, but beyond this year with the new Moody Center coming as well. So I was pumped at the hire. And what made it even better was you got him from a rival. And Texas Tech fans had just convinced themselves for years that Texas had no chance to poach Chris Beard away, that he was never leaving Lubbock. And sure enough, he did. So getting Tech fan tears made it all the better. But I think Chris Beard's going to work. I've said that for a long time. I'm not changing my tune at all. Love the hire at the time. Love it now. And once again, obvious reasons to be excited about Texas women's hoops. We saw that in year one of Vic Schaefer. I think we're going to see some pretty damn good things throughout year one of Chris Beard too. So that was an awesome day, Joe. One of my favorite, forget just Texas sports moments of the year. One of my favorite moments of the year was watching that whole thing unfold.
Yeah, the disdain from Lubbock definitely added to a lot of it, and the continued disdain from Lubbock. It's just you see why Chris Beard doesn't tweet very often.
I think I told you this like off the podcast, but like that night when it became official that Chris Beard was leaving Tech to come to Austin, I went and had a few beers with just a bunch of my Tech grad buddies. And I didn't have to say a damn thing. I came in there ready to talk so much shit, dude. I was ready to go, and they were so depressed and they were so in their feels. I didn't have to say a damn thing the entire time. It was so good. It was so
They
good.
still haven't stopped.
I get off on other sports fans' misery, as weird as that may sound, but it's true because I've had a bunch in my life. So I enjoy it when other people have to suffer a little bit, and that was a great day.
Exactly. So going back a little bit, we'll go back to baseball, and it had a very inauspicious start with the freeze in the background. Texas was unable to practice, and it's like, oh hey, go play Mississippi State, and oh hey, also you have to play Arkansas, and hey, you also have to play Ole Miss. So you have to play 3 of the top 10 teams in the country after you didn't practice for an entire week. And I think as Texas fans are want to do in what was a very much a prove it year for David Pierce, they panicked, and it was one of those things where you look at who was on the roster, you see the talent they had accumulated, both built up and via transfer, and guys who had made the return for another year. A lot of people just panicked way too early after 3 games and thought the team was lost. Well, once they were able to start practicing again, once they were able to start to get cohesive, once the bats started to come around, as they always seem to do for Texas, they're always lag behind the pitching and defense, but it finally showed up. And Texas became one of the formidable teams in the country. They did hit a little bit of a hiccup against West Virginia, but and Texas Tech, but they were still able to, with some help from others, finish tied atop the Big 12 standings, gain a national seed, and be able to host a regional. Took care of that regional in some dramatic fashion, including Eric Kennedy's home run, double to win over USF in I think game 1 of the regional finals, and then advanced in. Forgetting who? No, that was the super regional, was it not? Yeah. So they made it through their regional pretty easily. Arizona State, Fairfield, Southern. Fairfield decimated by COVID protocols, I believe, and just not having the pitching depth needed. Texas made it through pretty easily. Goes through USF and then goes to Omaha, and another inauspicious start against Mississippi State. But battles back, gets, Tennessee, gets Virginia, gets Mississippi State again. And with Omaha to go, they unfortunately came up just a little bit short in the end. But it was probably it was assuredly David Pierce's most successful season in Austin. And like I mentioned, in the midst of a gigantic prove-it year for David Pierce, he proved it and was rewarded and showed that what I've thought for a while, and that he's the right guy for the job at Texas and is building something pretty special this year. And it also led to my favorite moment in I think my favorite sports moment watching Texas this year was that Ivan Melendez home run in the ninth, the one that put him up 3, just crushes it, knows right away. Didn't go to Omaha, was watching it at home, and I just yelled extremely loudly in my living room and saw, he knew it and I knew it once I saw that he knew it. That's my moment of the year for Texas sports.
Oh, that was a fantastic moment after a rain delay too, right? It was so suspenseful, tie game, 9th inning in Omaha, an elimination game for Texas, and for the Latino Bambino to do that. Pretty freaking spectacular. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. You mentioned it, an inauspicious start to the season, an inauspicious start to Omaha as well. But they made some things happen and basically finished 3rd. I know that's not like a real title. They don't get a trophy for anything like that, but basically finished 3rd in all of college baseball this season. 50 wins in what was a prove-it year for David Pierce. You hit the nail on the head there, Joe. So, yeah, and there's a lot of people who think Texas is going to start next year as the #1 team in the country. So a lot of guys from that team coming back. Another really good recruiting class for David Pierce. It feels like he's got things going in the right direction. And it feels like he changed a lot of people's opinions on him too. Because look, Texas baseball, you got more history with the Texas baseball program than any other college baseball program. The standards here are exceptionally high, and they should be. This is a program who had 4 coaches for the span of 100 years. Like, they expect greatness, and they usually get greatness. So high bar for David Pierce. Took him a while to get where fans want. And look, fans want national championships. So there will be people who hold that against David Pierce until he finally gets over that hurdle. But a lot to like. And once again, it feels like things are absolutely going the right way at UFCU Dish Falk Field. So a fun ride for sure in Omaha. Ended a little bit sooner than any of us wanted to. Ended in heartbreaking fashion too, with that walk-off in that final game against Mississippi State. But a lot to like about the 2021 Texas baseball season, no question.
And that was late June. In the midst of all that, you've got Eddie Reese taking home national title number 15, retiring and then getting rehired returning to lead the men's swimming and diving program. You've got Texas women's swimming and diving, I think, finishing 3rd in the country, their first top 3. Softball making a good run, not as far as I think Mike White would have wanted, but still a good run nonetheless. And you got recruiting in the background, and it's kind of starting to we're going to hit the sour notes here. Summer is when there was some good recruiting news, but there was a lot of just dud recruiting news. Texas lost out on guys to Alabama and Ohio State and Texas A&M, and at some point, there a lot of the early higher highs that always accompany every single coaching hire and staff hire started to drizzle out a little bit when recruiting sort of, dropped off. I don't want to say dropped off, but hit a lot of bumpy patches. And I think that Bryce Anderson, the original Kelvin Banks recruitment, original Cam Williams recruitment, those were some of the moments that kind of made it pretty tough for Texas fans following recruiting over the course of the summer.
How many weeks are in a year, Joe?
52.
Okay. It was a pretty, if we're being completely honest, a pretty rough 49 to 50 weeks for Texas football. I mean, I know like the Sark hire, you can look at that as a good thing, right? That was at the start of the year. You can look at that as a positive, but obviously recruiting, the season didn't go the way that you wanted to, and they maybe salvaged a little bit in year one because they closed with a top 5 recruiting class and took advantage of all of the coaching turnover we saw across the country. But recruiting did hit a little bit of a lull in the summer, and man, we just remember the first full class for Charlie Strong and really the first full class for Tom Herman and how damn good that class was. So like expectations were pretty high. Like, okay, Sark, you're supposed to be better than Herman. That's why we brought you in here. What's going on here? What's going on here? So yeah, recruiting did hit a little bit of a lull. The honeymoon period didn't last that long. And obviously it was shortened even more once the actual season started and we got into conference play. But it's not to sugarcoat anything, man. And it'd be tough to sugarcoat even if you tried. For the most part, a very, very rough year for Steve Sarkisian and Texas football.
Yeah. Do you kind of want to just skip over most of September to, I guess, late December? We've had plenty of episodes about that.
Hey, September, like everything. I don't want to say everything because Arkansas happened, but like through October 2nd. And really through about
12:30 p.m. on October 9th.
Yeah, really until like that moment. Okay, things were all right. Like, obviously, Fayetteville was a disaster, but you're 4-1. You've got the big lead at the Cotton Bowl, and it's things are going in the right direction. And like even after the Cotton Bowl collapse, it's like all right, like that sucked, obviously, but we feel good. We feel good. And then it all completely fell apart. So we don't need to take that horrible trip down memory lane. We've talked about it enough. Fans have heard about it enough. But it was horrible. And just once again, like the vast majority of 2021, not a good one for Texas Longhorn football.
If you had to give, what's your top moment from the season? I'm trying to think of individual things. And a lot of those individual accomplishments were happened in losses. Can you think of what the top moment for you from this 2021 season was?
I mean, probably beating TCU, if that counts, and really just Bijan putting the team on his back in the fourth quarter of that game. I mean, it wasn't pretty. I didn't like a lot of Sark's play calling in the second half of that game, and Texas nearly let a huge lead get away from them, which, eventually became a theme of the Texas football season. They almost started that a week earlier than than they actually did. But like that, I mean, just Gary Patterson had Texas's number. And to go up there and beat those guys felt pretty good. Tech obviously putting up 70 on them, like that felt pretty damn good as well. I don't know if that's cheating, picking 2 of the 5 wins that they had, but like I don't know, those 2 moments felt pretty damn good for me. That's really all that I've got. Louisiana obviously was an impressive game from start to finish. We all got our hopes up a little bit too much after that. And Louisiana turned out to be a good team too. It's not like they sucked or anything. Like Texas just got worse again. So I don't know. What about you? How would you answer your question there? Any bright spots in a dim year for you?
I think if you're going to go with Bijan against TCU, I'll go with Roschon against Kansas State.
Okay.
Just a guy who, again, putting the team on his back, taking however many carries it was, because one quarterback had a high ankle sprain and the other had a thumb sprain that rendered him decently ineffective throwing the football in a way Steve Sarkisian would have wanted. Just takes it and runs with it, literally, and helps Texas to a game where they on the field they were winning pretty handily, but on the scoreboard it was pretty darn tight, and a lot of that win was because of him. I think there's a lot of Xavier Worthy moments to be pretty that are fun to look back on.
Sure.
Again, that Oklahoma game, there have only been 3 200-yard games, I think, in Texas history, and Xavier Worthy got one of them within his first 6 games, and he finished 12 yards short of Jordan Shipley's single. He finished a little bit short of a bunch of different records set by Jordan Shipley in various categories. He broke a Roy Williams record for freshman receiving touchdowns. He had 1,000 total yards because he snuck a couple carries in there, but he finished with 998 receiving on the year. That's not really a moment though. So, but I got to go Roschon in that game, and Worthy, lighting up Oklahoma despite how that finished.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that too. Xavier Worthy was a stud, man, and he's him and Bijan are right there at the top of the list. You throw Quinn Ewers in there too for reasons to be optimistic about this thing in 2022.
Yeah. So, and then, obviously the season ended, the staff got to go out on the road. A lot of what good happened to Texas didn't really happen to Texas. It was LSU changing coaches to, a splashy hire, but someone who, there's some 5-star prospects in the Houston area that LSU is in on that apparently Brian Kelly hasn't even called yet. And you've got them making a defensive coordinator hire from the Chiefs coaching staff who isn't even going to take his responsibilities till the Chiefs go on a run or are finished with their run. And I bet you're hoping that lasts for a long time. You look at A&M losing their defensive coordinator, which unfortunately didn't seem to help Texas a whole lot, but it may going forward. Lincoln Riley, of course, leaving Oklahoma for USC and removing one of your biggest and best and toughest recruiting threats in the region. Mario Cristobal leaving Oregon for Miami and opening up the door with both Cam Williams and Kelvin Banks, a guy who could start or play next year, maybe even start. Let's see what else. I'm forgetting one big one, but I can't even think of it right now.
There are so many of them.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, if you're a Texas fan, I think you respect what Brent Venables has done, but you may not fear him as much right now because of, he's never been a head coach. He's been under some great head coaches and has been one of the top defensive coordinators in college football over the past decade, but he's not some guy, especially him and Jeff Levy, who strikes a ton of fear if you're a Texas fan. Now, that's not, you're operating from a position of 5-7 right now, but after November and after the winning streak was snapped, Texas kept picking up a lot of good news on the recruiting front, on the, they made improvements on the coaching front. Other teams had to scramble on the coaching front, and December went as well as it could, except they didn't have the 15 bowl practices.
Yeah, no, Sark better hold on to that rabbit's foot or that 4-leaf clover or whatever the hell he used to get all of that luck that he got, because it's the only thing. Look, I can't say it saved 2021 for him, but it obviously ended the year on a high note. And yeah, he took advantage of all of the coaching turnover. There's no doubt. So it's great. I mean, transition classes, we've seen it around these parts. They're not as good. So when a lot of your recruiting rivals are transitioning, then you've got to take advantage of that. And Texas was able to do so. I mean, not a lot of optimism, not a lot of momentum on the recruiting front after going 5-7. Lost a lot of commitments, whether it was over the summer or through the course of the season. You know, guys committing to a lot of your big recruiting rivals elsewhere, guys committing out of state. It was frustrating for a long time, but then, yeah, you get all the coaching turnover and you're able to pick up some big time players at very, very important positions too in this class. So yeah, whatever it was, like Sark's not quite Lou Gehrig, the luckiest man on the face of the earth or anything like that, but he caught a break. No doubt about that. And I'll give him credit. He took advantage of it too. I'll give all the coaching staff and the recruiting staff credit for, you know, finding a way to get these kids from their situations that they were already committed to. But yeah, look, if we don't see the turnover, and it was historic turnover in the college football coaching carousel, if we don't see that, then I don't know how excited or optimistic anybody is about this thing going into year two. But now there's clearly a lot there, and it has a lot to do with recruiting.
I guess last thing we'll mention on the calendar front before going into the next topic, or is there anything that I've missed from maybe October, September, November that before we get into basketball, or is that kind of where you were starting to look at?
No, that's pretty good. I mean, I will give some love to the Texas volleyball team. Made it all the way to the national title match last year, lost to Kentucky, made it to the Elite Eight this year. I feel like they've made it to like 100 straight Sweet 16s. So even though they didn't achieve their ultimate goal of winning a natty, two really, really good results for Texas volleyball under Jared Elliott, which is seemingly a norm. So definitely wanted to give them some love. The Uterus came to be South End Zone at DKR, and obviously the Moncrief upgrades as well. No, I don't know. I feel like we hit everything that we needed to hit.
Yeah. So we harped on the schedule, or I harped on the schedule last week and discussed, you know, how they failed their two biggest tests, passed their medium test, and have beaten everybody else who they've had to so far. But Texas basketball now moves into conference play. And I guess, you know, a quick overview, I looked at some of the KenPom and net ratings for this conference. And hey, the Big 12 is good at basketball, Brad. How about that? They may have the best team in the country among its ranks. There's a top 5 team in the country among its ranks, and 5 probably top 20, top 30 caliber teams there too. So aside, is it Baylor and everybody else, or could you see some parity creating a bit of a race to the top this year?
I think Kansas is there with Baylor. Look, Baylor's been incredibly impressive. They haven't lost. They're really well deserving of their number 1 ranking. And it's crazy that they lost as much as they did from the national title team, and they're still where they're at. Another tip of the cap to Scott Drew, who's just done a phenomenal job in Waco, and I wish he would leave Waco. And I hate that he's still in Waco. So annoying. But I think Kansas is right there. Kansas is just loaded with talent and experience too. I feel like that's your tier 1 in the Big 12. And if you want to put Baylor a little bit ahead of Kansas, that's fine. I probably would do that too as we go into conference play. But I feel like Kansas is a good enough team that like realistically has a shot to win the Big 12. And then after that, there's that second tier with Texas. I'd probably put Texas Tech in there. I'd probably put West Virginia in there as well. Maybe Oklahoma can creep into there too. They're getting some love from KenPom. Hell, Iowa State hasn't lost a freaking game yet, but they play Baylor this weekend. So we'll learn a lot about the Cyclones in their conference opener. Basically, I'm echoing your point, Joe. The conference is loaded again, and I'm going to miss it. I'm not going to miss it, but I'm going to miss it when Texas moves to the SEC because, well, it's like the good news is the SEC is not as good of a basketball conference. So like, should make life a little bit easier for Chris Beard. But the bad news is, I mean, it's just fun. It's entertaining, like no days off in this league. And like last year, we talked about this last week. No, last year, Iowa State sucked. Kansas State sucked. TCU not very good. Well, those teams are all much improved this year. Like there really is not an easy game in the Big 12 this season. So it's going to be a dogfight. It's going to be a gauntlet for Texas over the next couple of months. And we'll see how it goes. And like you said, you talked about it last week, the schedule in the non-con, not great. They failed their 2 toughest tests. And well, now they've got to play really good teams seemingly the rest of the way. So it'll be fun. I liked what I saw in the final tune-up game against Incarnate Word. And, Joe, I heard a couple of the players. I think Trey Mitchell was one of the players made available after the game. And he's talking about how, hey, Chris Beard sat us down and he's like, it's go time. Like, we're not messing around anymore. It's conference play. We got to start figuring it out. We got to amp our game up a little bit. And that was a really dominant performance. Incarnate Word's not good. I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that. But that was one of, if not Texas's most complete performances of the year. And that came after, the Alabama State game in which they trailed like by 9 in the first half, in a game that they were favored by 31, and they looked kind of lethargic in that sort of makeup game, or I guess it was a COVID replacement game because of Rice issues. So they played well in their last non-conference game. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about it since the start of the season. We'll learn about this team when Big 12 play starts, and well, it starts on Saturday.
The 2 things from, I guess, those last couple games that I'm looking at. One, Courtney Raymond, I guess, is back. Good to see him he got the most minutes on Tuesday, Wednesday against Incarnate Word, and took care of business, played pretty well, looked engaged. He's looked engaged the whole time, but just played a handful of minutes against Alabama State for whatever reason. And then also, I don't think this team still has a sure starting lineup. I think it's got a sure rotation. I think who the top 8 are going to be, and credit to Tristan Lacone for getting playing time, but I think you're about to see those minutes dwindle. But I'm curious who's going to be the 20-minute-a-night guys, because we saw a starting combination on Tuesday that offered probably the best size or second best size that this lineup can offer. It was Jones, it was Carr, and then it was Allen, Mitchell, and Bishop all on the floor at the same time, with Ramey and Disu being the next guys off the bench. And I mean, those are going to be your core 7. Barack Cunningham's going to get his pest minutes. Jace Febris is going to get his minutes. And, Disu and Bishop and Mitchell are going to rotate to a certain extent. But, it's hard to give 20 minutes a night to 7 different guys.
Yeah.
And not, have to worry about not only your depth issues, but just fatigue. So I'm still curious where this team goes, but at the same time, I like that size just to start things out for a team that doesn't have a ton of it, to try and throw it out there all at the same time, especially when they're going to be playing some teams like West Virginia, who Bob Huggins does not let peace soft, and you're going to K-State, which is a tough environment, and you want to be able to get those rebounds. So I think I wonder if it's going to be Febris or Ramey, or I know who it's going to be, but I guess I'm wondering just kind of whose role is going to dwindle more and more as they get into conference play, looking at that lineup.
I am too. It kind of sounds like a first world problem, doesn't it? Like you just have too many talented players, and Texas has a bunch of talented players. And that's been the biggest question for me, and I think most Texas basketball fans all year long, is, well, when do these guys build their chemistry? When do they gel? When do they mesh? When do they find their roles? More importantly, when does Chris Beard figure all of this out? When does the coaching staff figure out how to best utilize these guys? So, yeah, I'm also fascinated to see what the rotation looks like. And look, I hope it's not I don't know how I'm going to make this comparison. Sorry to do this, but I hope it's not like a Tom Herman rotation thing where it's just like guys are playing just to play. Like, no, like put your best guys out there. And your best guys might not be the same guys every night. So like whoever's got the hot hand, like ride those guys, let them play. So hopefully we see that from Chris Beard. He did a great job of that at Tech. He had some deep, talented rosters during his time in Lubbock. So I trust him to figure it out. But yeah, there hasn't been like an obvious starting lineup or an obvious late game lineup for Texas this year. I was kind of hoping we'd have that figured out by now. The Disu injury obviously changed some things a little bit, but they got to figure it out quick because, yeah, no easy games in this conference. And you mentioned it, West Virginia with Taz Sherman and Sean McNeil. I feel like those guys have both been there forever. It's a good team, and they should be ranked. They're not. Maybe if they beat Texas, they will be ranked next week, I think. So yeah, it's going to be fun, man. I'm excited, but a little bit nervous too, because once again, this league is really freaking good.
You think in whatever pregame phone call they may have, Chris Beard is telling Bob Huggins, "Thank you for saying that Oscar Tshiebwe doesn't work hard."
Yeah, thank God he's not here. Oh man,
he's a rebounding force against a team that is not particularly great, would have been a rebounding force. He probably would have pulled down 30. Probably would have gotten everything.
He had 20 plus a couple of weeks ago for Kentucky. Yeah, he's a beast. I can't believe Huggins let him go. And look, I guess Kentucky, you get the chance to play there. It's hard to be too critical of a kid, but man, Tshiebwe, in today's college basketball, they don't make a lot of dudes like that. I would do whatever I could to keep that guy around, and I'm glad he's not around. Glad Texas does not have to see him this year because, yeah, he'd be a problem with the size and the rebounding ability that he possesses. So thankfully, West Virginia doesn't have that, and there's no obvious size disadvantage for UT this weekend.
So what does West Virginia offer against the Longhorns? I haven't, I don't watch the whatever game is on like you may a little bit more than I do. So what does West Virginia offer this weekend that Texas will need to look to stop?
Yeah, well, the two guys I just talked about, Taz Sherman and Sean McNeil, are fantastic players. I mean, both of those guys are playing about 35 minutes a game this year. McNeil, a sharpshooting, annoying white guy. You're going to hate him if you don't already hate him from years past. He knocks down everything. And when he's hot, he's one of the best shooters in the country. And Taz Sherman, a guy from Missouri City, from the H-Town area, has just gotten better every single year. And he's I think he's top 5 or top 10 in terms of leading scorers in all of college basketball, averaging a shade under 21 a game. So those are the two guys to look out for. You will see some huggy ball, right? You'll see some full court press. You'll see some of the stuff that you're used to seeing from West Virginia, and you'll see some offensive struggles, like a low scoring game. I'm trying to find the total right now, but I would lean under whatever it is because you've got two defensive-minded coaches. You've got two tough and gritty teams. It could be a dogfight at the Flan. Saturday morning, mimosas, Joe, mimosas at the Irwin Center on Jan 1. You making it out for that?
I will be there. I don't know if I can partake in the mimosas.
Come on.
Unfortunately, I trust me, I would. But it's hard for me to look at any West Virginia team as something that's going to be less than a defensive presence and team that can figure it out on the half court as they need to. You think this game gets above 120 total?
It'll be right around there, I think. I'm trying to pull up Ken Palm's matchup predictor to see what he thinks about this game because he gives predictions for he's got 63 to 56, so that's 119 total. He's got Texas winning, by the way.
I was right there. Maybe I should work out in the desert.
Well
Something
done
like
there.
That.
So, yeah, no, I mean, this would be a nice win for Texas. It's a game Texas should win. Look, I've said this all year long. You don't want to put too much stock into any one game, especially when it's not in the month of March. But, like, if you lose at home to West Virginia, then it's like, what's on the road at West Virginia going to look like? What's 2 against Baylor? What's 2 against Kansas going to look like? So, obviously want to start conference play with the win. You want to protect home floor. This is one of the more winnable games in the conference, getting West Virginia at home. As crazy as that sounds, because they're a damn good team that's 11-1 right now and receiving votes in the top 25 conversation. But this is one that you would obviously like to get if you're Chris Beard and company.
I think it'd probably be a quadrant 1 win, and they don't have one of those right now. I need to look specifically, but of the ones they have, or the games that they've played, it's got the best chance, I think, to turn into a quadrant 1 win. Mm-hmm. Do you want to – I have a Big 12 question or a Kansas State question. Which would you rather have before we probably close it out?
I hate K-State. Let's do Big 12.
All right. Do you think who knows if the Big 12 or the NCAA or anybody alters their protocols right now. But let's say Texas just misses, and I think this may be optimistic, but let's say they just one game doesn't happen. So they play 17 conference games, I think it is. Do you think something like 9-8, 8-9 gets them in? And then do you think something like 7-10 would get them in?
18 conference games because you play each of the 9 teams twice.
Right. But looking at
you're saying with the COVID thing.
let's say, okay, so let's start at the best case scenario. Do you think 9-9 gets them in, and do you think 8-10 would get them in?
Oh God. In this league, I feel like 9-9 gets them in. It's early to tell in terms of the bubble. Like the ACC is really down this year. That's going to help. Look, there's a shot. I mean, we've seen over the last couple of years sub 500 conference play teams finally get into the tournament. Like, it took forever for that to happen, and it's starting to happen more. So I wouldn't be surprised if a sub 500 Big 12 team found their way into the dance. Maybe the brand of Texas, maybe Chris Beard's past tournament history would give Texas a bump, whether that's fair or not. I feel like the committee sometimes does stuff like that. So hopefully that's not a conversation we have to have, because I'm so freaking tired of having the bubble conversation. We did that every year under Shaka Smart, except for the 1 year we knew Texas wasn't getting into the freaking tournament. And I guess last year too. We knew they were a lock last year as well. But yeah, the end of Rick Barnes and most of Shaka Smart's tenure was the bubble conversation. So I'm hoping we are over that. But yeah, I do think both of those records, if Texas falters and gets to that point, would be enough to get Texas into the big dance.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens with everything else. Just the way until the protocols change, the protocols have been wreaking havoc over a bunch of games right now, and it's hard to think that Texas or one of their opponents will make it through unscathed. Even TCU right now, I think, is on pause, and they already lost the game to Rice, which probably will help their strength of schedule, the fact that they didn't even play them. So I think so too. I mean, we saw 8-10 get Texas into the tournament a few years ago now. That was with probably a better non-conference schedule at the very least. I can't remember the record off the top of my head, but 8-10 got them in. And if it's, if every team is top 100 in net or KenPom, and I know it's probably going to change as the course of the year goes on, because somebody's got to be at the bottom of the conference. You're not going to have a bunch of 500 teams and then just Baylor. Or maybe you do. That'd be pretty impressive. And you already know that Oklahoma State, no matter what their record is not getting in. So maybe this is the another year. But I think as I harped on last week, the non-conference is going to make that a challenge, to where that margin for error is a lot thinner than it would have been had they gotten maybe a top 100 win or scheduled a little bit tougher.
Agreed, 100%. Now, the good news is in this conference, you've got a lot of chances to pick up those quality wins for the tournament resume. But, yeah, not a ton of margin for error in terms of the non-con. Obviously, if they won that game in Spokane or won that game in New Jersey, they'd be in a much better spot. But I don't want to talk about this, man. I don't want to talk about COVID and bubble stuff. I don't want to do this. I should have taken the K-State question.
Well, hopefully we'll have 18 games to talk about.
Yeah,
a resume to go through. We'll see if it gets there. I think that's about all we need to get over. We got about an hour's worth of stuff in. Anything else you want to cover, or is that good for the last podcast of the year?
I think it's great for the last podcast of the year. Hit a lot of pertinent Texas Longhorn conversation, and also the year in review. Love it. Pour some out for Jalen Tyson, by the way, who is leaving Texas
in his
basketball
8 minutes a game or whatever, or 1 minute a game.
Gone too soon. But that's going to do it for this week's edition of the 1-0 podcast. Appreciate y'all's support all year long. Wishing you all a very happy and healthy new year. Make sure you follow Joe on Twitter at JosephCook89 and subscribe to Inside Texas over at InsideTexas.com if you haven't done that already. Make it a New Year's resolution. They're the best insider site out there, InsideTexas.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Brad Kellner and listen to The Wheelhouse on ESPN Houston every weekday from 3 to 7 p.m. ESPN975.com is the website if you are outside of the Houston area. Shout out again to our sponsors, AV Consultations and Aldstat Beer. And shout out to you guys once again for your continued love and support. Until next year, there's a dad joke for you. Y'all stay safe. Y'all stay healthy and hook 'em.